All right, everybody, we are back with section 7 of our cybercrime course. And this section is all about piracy. And I don't mean, parrots on your shoulder, eye patch, sailing the high seas kind of piracy. I mean digital piracy. And digital piracy is essentially, again, this is a little bit oversimplified, but downloading and acquiring some kind of media. It could be music, movies and television shows, computer programs that you don't have the legal right to, that you don't own the intellectual property rights to. And according to the industries that run, music and movies and television shows, piracy is a huge problem. So kind of at its peak, music piracy in kind of the early 2000s up until recently, there has been, again, according to these industries, a significant reduction in legal purchases of things like music, right? So as acquiring music illegally became easier than acquiring it legally, the number of legal sales dropped. And then as legal sales became easier with the rise of things like iTunes and other streaming services like Spotify and Pandora, illegally acquiring it became less attractive, and thus sales weren't kind of impacted as much, right? There was one survey relatively recently that said that 15% of all music consumers had downloaded music without paying for it at some point. The organizations behind the legal acquiring of these services have claimed that a quarter of all the internet traffic at one point in the mid-2000s was illegal, i.e. illegally downloading movies and music and computer programs and all that stuff that took up a quarter of all internet bandwidth at one point. Is that an accurate number? Well, the people who came up with it were kind of, let's just say, monetarily invested in making that seem as bad as possible. So take these numbers with a little grain of salt. But they might be absolutely true. I don't know. Now, intellectual property just means some kind of idea or artistic work, whether that's a book or a piece of music or a movie or whatever, that somebody has a legal right to owning. And again, if we go back to the history of cybercrime and talk about the early hackers, this was kind of antithetical to the entire philosophy of those early computer criminals, and continues to be kind of antithetical to a lot of the hacking and computer crime community. But there is a difference between different kinds of intellectual property. And there are more than three, but the three biggest kinds of legal protections for internet property are copyrights, trademarks, and patents. And these are very different things. A lot of people kind of use these terms independently, but they do refer to different things. And again, this is kind of overly simplified, but this is not a course on intellectual property law. I'm just, this is a very surface level understanding of these things. But again, at the surface level, a copyright is the legal ownership of some artistic work. A poem, a book, a piece of music, a movie. If you created that thing, you have the copyright to it, and that copyright is the legal protection you have against other people stealing or illegally using that created material. A trademark is for like names, right? So the company name Microsoft is trademarked, and thus if I were to create a company and call it Microsoft, the original Microsoft would sue me for violation of their trademark because that name is controlled and legally owned by that company. And then a patent, or a patent, depending on whether you're British or American, is for a product or a process that somebody has invented, and they want legal protection for that to prevent other people from using it and profiting off of it without giving them monetary credit, right? So if I invent a new widget that makes, I don't know, baking bread easier, I can get a patent on that device, and then anybody who wants to produce that device has to pay me for the use of my patent. And each one of these things lasts a different amount of time. So I think at this point, copyrights last something like 100 years. So if there's some book or obviously they didn't have movies and television show. Well, they had very basic silent movies 100 years ago. But any movie or book or character over 100 years old is in the public domain. Anybody can use that without violating any copyright. Trademarks last, I don't know how long, as long as I think they're being used. And then patents last, I can't remember, it's like 25 years or something like that. But each one has a different kind of lifetime and a different amount of time it protects the person who copyrighted or trademarked or patented that idea or thing. So piracy has always been an issue. And again, I'm not talking about, sailing the seven seas and yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. I mean, the intellectual property copying and taking illegally has always been a thing. And, we can go all the way back to hundreds and hundreds of years ago when sheet music, composers, Beethoven, Mozart, whoever, would write this new opera or symphony or whatever. And there were entire industries of people who would take that sheet music and copy it and then sell it for their own. And it was very difficult to kind of keep track of that because people would just sit down and, have a pen and sheet paper and just copy and then, hey, here you go. In the kind of 70s and 80s, audio tapes became a big source of piracy, right? Because, a lot of you watching this probably aren't old enough to remember. But, we had audio cassettes like is pictured there in that image. And audio tapes were essentially super easy to copy. If I bought a copy of the latest tape from, Madonna or whoever, I could put that in a tape player and then put a blank tape in the other side of that tape player and copy that. It was essentially super easy. And if I didn't want to buy that initial tape, I could just record off of the radio, right? So piracy in that day and age was super, super, super easy. All you had to do was spend, 50 cents or whatever on a blank tape, find somebody who owned a copy of the tape and copy it or record it off the radio or whatever. And then CDs came out, right? Late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there. CDs came out. And CDs, the music industry loved them because they were really, really difficult to copy. People did not have the ability to record their own CDs or copy their own CDs in their houses. That was incredibly rare. So it was much more difficult to pirate CDs up until about the early 2000s. CD-ROM writers became more popular and people started being able to buy those and put them in their home computers. And then it became a lot easier to copy CDs just like they used to copy audio tapes. Around the same time as CD writers came out, though, we also got MP3s. So prior to MP3s, the size of a music file was really large. Like the amount of data it took to have a good quality audio recording was really large. So even if you did have the equipment to take a CD and take the music off of that CD and save it onto your computer, the amount of space it took up on your hard drive was really huge. Hard drives were much smaller back then, and these files were really large. So, you had to be essentially pretty rich to be able to afford enough hard drive space to store a lot of songs. But then, again, around the late 90s, early 2000s, A, hard drives started getting bigger, and B, MP3 file format was introduced. And that, the MP3 file format was revolutionary because it had the same quality audio in a much smaller file, right? You could get an MP3 of a song in CD quality audio for, a few megabytes, 3-4 megabytes. And so now we had hard drives big enough and audio files small enough that we could save hundreds or thousands of MP3 files on our computer and have that audio file on our computer to listen to whenever we wanted. And importantly, share those files over the internet. So I could buy a CD, convert all the songs on it into MP3 files, save them on my computer for use and listening to whenever I wanted, even if I didn't have the physical CD on me. And then I could send those songs to my friends and put them out on the internet for anybody who wants to download. And in the early days, MP3s got traded over IRC, which is Internet Relay Chat, which was huge at the time. It still exists, although it's not nearly as popular as it used to be. Or news groups. You could just post MP3 files up on these news groups, and anybody who wanted to could download them. And then in the late 90s, relatively soon after the MP3 file format became really popular, there was a service called Napster. And Napster was a computer program that was hugely popular. And what would happen is you could download Napster onto your computer, and then you could connect to a central server, and that central server had, anybody who connected to it would put their MP3 files up for sharing. And then anybody who wanted to, if I wanted the latest song, I could open up Napster, type in the search bar the name of that song, and it would bring up everybody who had that song on their computer, and I could just click on it to download it, and now I have a copy of that song. And all the songs that I had on my computer get shared to other people, so we started all sharing MP3s back and forth, and it became super easy to find whatever music you wanted, even the obscure stuff, right? So music lovers loved it. And of course it was illegal, but it took a while. It took a couple of years before it went through the court system, and the court system finally ruled that Napster was illegal, but they ruled in such a way that it was illegal because there was that central server that everybody's data went through. So Napster got taken down. But similar services popped up to fill that void where there wasn't a central server. Instead of going through that one, Napster core, these news services like Kazaa and LimeWire, and there was a whole bunch more, it was called peer-to-peer. Instead of going through that central group, you just went from you to the person who had the song with no middleman in between. And thus it kind of bypassed that court ruling that took down Napster. And those services were really popular for a while, but they got a bad reputation because there were a lot of viruses and other malware that got put up onto those services. So you'd think you were downloading the latest MP3 of the song you wanted, but as soon as it got onto your computers, it's a virus. Oh, it's adware. Oh, it's, something horrible. But because so many people wanted access to that music, they didn't want to pay the $20 or $25 for the CD. They just wanted the one song, and, so they downloaded it. They were still super popular. And that kind of evolved into what we still have today, which is BitTorrent. And BitTorrent is kind of even broader than a Kazaa or LimeWire type service. It operates on a similar principle where it's peer-to-peer, where you have, if I wanted to download something illegal from another user, I would go directly to them and download it. So the BitTorrent protocol, the BitTorrent process has kind of replaced all those services because it's easier and kind of wider reaching. And now you just have to find a website that tells you kind of who has what, essentially. And then you can load your BitTorrent client and download it directly from those other users. And the kind of famous website where you can find these BitTorrent links, these BitTorrent files, in order to download from those other people. It's called the Pirate Bay, and the Pirate Bay has been around for decades at this point. And it's what it's doing would be illegal in most countries, but it's hosted in countries where what they're doing is not illegal. And since anybody the world over can connect to that country's servers and the Pirate Bay website, me here in the United States, I can go to the Pirate Bay website and get access to it, because even though what they're doing would be illegal in the United States, they're not in the United States, right? So I can be held liable for downloading it, but they can't be held liable for hosting it and giving people the links and helping spread all these illegally acquired, again, movies and music and television shows and ebooks and all that stuff. Now, one of the ways that these companies have kind of tried to fight against this illegal acquiring of their intellectual property is digital rights management. And digital rights management comes in lots of different forms, but essentially it's some kind of process or program or piece of software that tries to prevent copying, tries to prevent you being able to share your songs or programs or whatever with other people, right? So I remember way back in the day, back in the late 90s when I was in high school, I would buy the latest video games, and the video game, have a CD, and I'd have to put that CD into my computer to play the game. And even though all the files I needed to play the game were on my computer, there was no technical reason why I needed to have that CD in the drive. That was digital rights management. I needed that CD in the drive not to actually run the game. I needed that CD in the drive because that company wanted to make sure that I had purchased that game and hadn't just copied the files, bought it once and copied the files onto 10 different computers and had 10 people playing that game after having only purchased it once. So they put a software into that game to say, essentially, if the CD is not detectable in the user's CD-ROM drive right now, don't run, right? So now everybody who wanted to play had to have a physical copy of that CD in order to play that game, right? And digital rights management has changed and morphed and grown along the way. There's now lots of different kinds of digital rights management and ways to try to prevent users from copying and using programs and movies and stuff without your permission. And we'll talk more about that in a later slide. But one of the things that really kind of made piracy much less common was the rise in legal access and making it way easier to access this content in a legal way rather than an illegal way. So keep in mind, when MP3s became super popular, accessing it legally was, expensive. You'd have to buy an entire CD for, again, $20-25, whatever CDs went for back then. You would get a lot of, even if you only wanted the one song, you had to buy the entire CD. You had to drive to a physical store to go purchase it, So it was really difficult and time-consuming and expensive to get legal access to these things. It was so much easier just to click a few buttons and get the MP3. But kind of in the mid-late 2000s, companies figured out, hey, if we make this a lot easier to access legally, people will just pay the money instead of gaining it legally. So that's when we saw the rise of things like iTunes and Pandora and Spotify for music, right? Where we can legally access those songs. And now there's, I can go on iTunes and spend 99 cents for the one song I actually want. I don't have to drive down to a CD store. I don't have to pay a whole bunch of money to get a bunch of songs I don't want just to get the one song I do want. I can just go, it's 99 cents. I'll download that one song that I want. Great, easy, simple. I have no problem paying the 99 cents. And so I'm not going to pirate it when I can just get it so easily and cheaply like that. Netflix did the same thing for movies and television shows. Like if I can just pay like, $10 a month or whatever it is to get access to all the movies and television shows that I would want to illegally acquire, then, let's pay the $10 a month and get it legally and easily, and it comes right to my television or right to my computer. Makes it so much easier. So because those legal ways to access this kind of stuff eventually became popular, piracy rates went down. Now, in the kind of cybercrime specific to piracy subculture, there were 3 different kinds of people who would pirate data, who would pirate movies, music, television shows, etc., etc., etc. And this was kind of a hierarchy. At the top was the creators. These are the people who would, find the art, the music, the programs, the software, the movies, and take those and put them into a form that was shareable online. They would get the CD with the music and turn all those songs into MP3s and then post them online, right? That's kind of the top. Those are the most looked up to, the most prestigious of the people in the piracy community. Then there were the traders, and these are the people who would kind of create these large collections of music and, whatever else, and then share them out with everybody. They would have them all accessible. Anybody who wants to can come take from me. I've created this giant collection of all these different songs or all these different movies or this entire, 85 episodes of this TV show, and I have it all available for use. And those are the traders. At the bottom of the ladder, at the bottom of the hierarchy, the most kind of looked down upon are the leechers. And these are the people that would just log in, take what they wanted, download it, and then not share it, not let other people take it from them. So they would connect to, say, a trader, find the movie they wanted to watch, download it, and then not make that movie then available to download by other people, right? So they were only taking, they weren't then sharing. And so because those people weren't kind of contributing to this process, they were kind of looked down upon. They were at the lowest level of this subculture's hierarchy. All right, we will be back in a moment with the second half of this section. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.